Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. It waits behind every thought, beneath every dream, inside every fear. The warp is not simply another dimension, it is the echo chamber of every soul, the graveyard of gods, and perhaps the birthplace of things we have never dared to name. We call it chaotic, mad, impossible to navigate, but what if that very madness is civilization? Not ours, but theirs. Hidden, ancient, or yet to come. Maybe the warp is not empty between demons. Maybe it is teeming with entire cultures, ideas made flesh, cities of sorrow and hope floating in a sea of psychic agony. Maybe we've only seen the surface, and deeper down, there are empires. The birth of the Chaos Gods was never a planned event. No architect drafted their rise. No single civilization conjured them with purpose. Instead, they are the collective scream of countless trillions, an evolutionary byproduct of emotion and consciousness pushed into the warp until the sea itself awoke and took form. Each Chaos God reflects something more than mere emotion. They are civilizations shattered, reassembled into eternal archetypes. When Slaanesh tore into being, it wasn't only the death cry of the Eldar that birthed them. It was their art, their decadence, their vision of perfection, all twisted into a singular, radiant horror. That isn't just power. That's culture made monstrous, preserved forever in a god. The same applies to the others. Khorne rose not only from bloodlust, but from the endless cycles of war that defined countless races, primitive and advanced, each one pouring their valor, hatred, discipline, and fury into a single point of pressure in the warp until it erupted into a deity. When you stare at Khorne's brass throne, you're not looking at a simple war god's seat. You're looking at the throne of 1,000,000 forgotten empires, all of whom worshipped conquest, who defined their existence by the blade, whose societal values were literally engraved in the warp as architecture. Tzeentch is even more terrifying. For Tzeentch is not only change, but ambition. Imagine the ancient Xenos scholar races whose entire civilizations were structured around knowledge, arcane mastery, manipulation. Perhaps they still exist, not in real space, but as eternal contributors to the libraries of Tzeentch. Maybe their minds were so suffused with desire for truth that they now echo as the blue flames in his realm. Maybe the shifting mazes, the libraries, the impossible geometries, all of it is the sediment of intellectual civilizations long disintegrated in the material, but living on as foundations within the mind realm of their patron. And then there is Nurgle. Oh, grandfather. His garden reeks not only of rot but of memory, the comforting slowness of decay, of civilizations that refuse to die. Cultures who faced plagues, famine, collapse, and instead of resisting, accepted their fate with smiles and songs. There's a softness in Nurgle's horror. A community of death, a civilization of the end, where every crumbling building is not abandoned but loved. He may be born from fear of death, but his realm is shaped by those who embraced it, whose cultural belief in endurance still echoes in every bloated tree and swollen river of his domain. This is where it becomes chilling. These gods are not simply entities, they are living fossils of collective civilization. Their realms are built not by their hands, but by the psychic residue of trillions. Whole species, long gone, may still exist as archetypal currents in these divine realms. Every daemon is shaped by subconscious cultural themes. Every castle in the realm of chaos could be a warped recreation of a real palace, imagined by a dreaming race 10 million years ago. Nothing in the warp is arbitrary. All of it is shaped by us, by them. By civilizations who screamed so loudly into the warp that they etched their identity into its fabric. But it goes further. What if some civilizations were not consumed but preserved? What if a fragment of the Eldar, before the fall, survived inside Slaanesh, still singing, still painting their tragedy on the inside of their god's belly? What if Khorne's legions are not only demons, but ghosts of empires who loved war so much they marched willingly into eternal battle? Could a culture's entire way of life, their art, their language, their values, survive as a viral pattern, endlessly recreated within the warp's eddies? We must also consider the danger of reverse influence. If gods are shaped by civilizations, and those gods now exert influence back onto reality, then perhaps they are not just reflections but curators. They have tastes, preferences. They prune. They favor certain societal traits because those traits feed them, resonate with them. Is it not strange that certain mortal empires rise in perfect symphony with the domains of the gods? Could the chaos gods be subtly engineering the rebirth of their favored cultural patterns through cults, dreams, visions? In this way, the civilizations that birthed the gods may be reseeding themselves through religion, war, or ambition, spreading like cultural viruses from the immaterium back into the materium. And if this is true, if civilizations do not truly die but merely change form, then what we call the realm of chaos may be something more terrifying than hell. It may be a museum, or worse, a farm, a place where cultural essence is harvested, refined, preserved. A place where the stories of races are not forgotten, but replayed endlessly in grotesque cycles for the amusement, sustenance, or divine evolution of the gods they birthed. In that sense, to fall to chaos is not annihilation, but transformation, into living culture, into immortal archetype, into the very essence of what that civilization once was, and always will be, inside the warp. There is a deep, chilling irony to how the Imperium and other real space civilizations view the warp, as nothing more than a highway for travel, a hostile tide for psychers to navigate, or a corrupted veil of raw emotion. But the question we never dare ask is, what if something lives there not as an invader, but as a native? Not daemons, not gods, but civilizations born entirely within the immaterium. Conscious, structured, evolved societies that never had physical bodies, never needed planets or suns, and never once looked out toward the stars. What if the warp itself is home? The possibility is more than speculative. It's a philosophical necessity. If the warp is an alternate dimension, reactive to thought and emotion, then over billions of years, it's plausible that structures of self-sustaining order might emerge within it. Not necessarily by intent, but by accumulation. When enough psychic residue coalesces in one region shaped by compatible emotions or patterns, what is to stop it from forming persistent structures? When those structures attract further psychic energy, they might develop feedback loops, stability, memory, identity. In time, identity becomes thought, and thought seeks community. From that, civilization blooms. But these are not civilizations as we understand them. They would be without flesh, without matter, possibly without language. They would communicate through resonance, form castes by emotional gradients, construct cities from currents of pure fear or longing, and define territory by psychic harmonics. A nation might be a single living thought stitched across 1,000 dimensions, or a song composed of 1 billion individual voices pulsing in rhythmic unity. Perhaps some have laws. Perhaps others are anarchic collectives, pulsating as chaos within chaos. One might imagine a civilization that exists entirely within a conceptual shape, a spiral of paranoia and hope, looping forever, each citizen a unique variation of the same emotion. Another might be a hive mind of ancestral memory, where every entity within it is a manifestation of a forgotten person's dream. These would not be merely intelligent, they would be aesthetic, ideological, living metaphors. A civilization might be founded not on geography or technology, but on a single idea so powerful that it sustains an entire region of warp space as a culture. And we would never know, because these things would not seek contact. To them, real space might appear as crude, flat, a temporary illusion, like shadows dancing on the edge of their eternal storm. They may regard us with curiosity, revulsion, or indifference, or perhaps we are myths to them, brief flashes of light that scream into their domain before being torn apart by demons or dissolved into raw thought. We might be the meteorite crashing into their ocean, the anomaly, the infection. They may study us in ways we cannot perceive, or ignore us entirely. But here is the terrifying thought. We may have already encountered them and failed to recognize them as life. What if some daemons are merely emissaries of these deeper civilizations? What if the realm of chaos is not a wilderness but a complex mosaic of cultures, each with its own rules, customs, and ideologies? What if some of those who become lost in the warp are not destroyed but absorbed, transformed into citizens of societies that exist purely as awareness? Imagine a civilization that collects nightmares and shapes them into architecture. Another that survives by cultivating pain, not in a sadistic sense, but as a resource. One might consider terror to be sacred and send missionaries to feed on psychic echoes of war. Another could be a council of obsessions, each one governing a sphere of thought like abstract tyrants. And perhaps some are builders, carefully sculpting beauty from the raw chaos around them, forming delicate emotional sanctuaries that shimmer like coral reefs in the tempest. We may even be unwittingly birthing new civilizations in the warp every day. Each great event in real space, a war, a genocide, a cultural renaissance, sends shockwaves into the warp. Sometimes those waves decay, but sometimes they resonate. They gather energy, pull in similar frequencies, and stabilize. Those nodes might be the embryos of civilization, clusters of psychic resonance that slowly develop into awareness. In time, they might seek order, define identity, form memory. They might become people, and then, inevitably, politics. The terrifying possibility is not that the warp is alive. We already know it is. The terrifying possibility is that it is old, that civilizations have risen and fallen in its currents for eons before the first human dreamed, before the Eldar sang, before the old ones carved stars. Civilizations with no need of stars. Civilizations who have forgotten us, even as we fight to remember ourselves. In this context, the Chaos Gods might be seen not as tyrants, but as landlords. Territorial powers who enforce certain boundaries, yes, but who also allow, perhaps even nurture, the growth of lesser cultures beneath their gaze. Or perhaps the gods are just the loudest. The most successful empires in an endless sea of quieter civilizations, each pulsing in and out of existence with no need for mortal recognition. And if these warp civilizations do exist, they are not evil. They are not good. They are simply other, alien in the most profound sense. They are the civilizations that never fell from the stars because they never needed to rise. Imagine a civilization once mighty, once feared, torn apart by war or plague or madness. Its monuments crumble, its people vanish, its name fades from record. In the material world, it dies. But in the warp, things do not end. Memory lingers, emotion echoes. And sometimes when the death of a people is cataclysmic enough, when it screams into the warp with enough psychic agony, enough terrified prayer, enough mourning and fire, that civilization does not vanish. It migrates. The theory of interstellar refugees of the Soul Sea is one born from the darkest recesses of Warhammer speculation. It is not the survival of individuals who enter the warp like a ship lost in a storm. It is the flight of entire cultures, driven from reality into unreality by forces too great to overcome. Think of the war in heaven, the vast psychic conflict between the Old Ones and the Necrontyre, their allies, their enemies. That war was not just fought with weapons, it was fought with minds. Whole species were psychically gutted, twisted, erased. But some, perhaps, saw what was coming. Some saw the tide of annihilation approaching and made the most desperate choice of all. Escape not to another star, but to another state of being. If such an exodus occurred, its signs would be invisible to most. These cultures would have abandoned their bodies, their machines, their histories, even their sense of time. They would have become conceptual remnants, forging continuity within the sea of thought, threading their souls into currents that would protect them from consumption. Not a physical migration, but an ontological one. A retreat into unbeing. In the warp, they may have remade themselves. Stripped of material needs, they might have evolved into something unrecognizable. A race that once used ships and blades might now drift as spheres of harmonic thought, communicating through waves of longing. Their cities might be formed from patterns of nostalgia, reinforced by collective memory and myth. Each citizen a verse in an endless poem of survival. They would fear the gods, of course. The chaos entities would see them as prey, or perhaps curiosities, but the clever ones, the lucky ones, would have found ways to hide, camouflage. Not in darkness, but in resonance. Mimicking dead emotions, pretending to be fragments, illusions, background noise, and in doing so, enduring. Perhaps some refugees joined existing warp civilizations, offering their knowledge, their songs, their trauma in exchange for shelter. Others might have become nomads, drifting from region to region, reforming their identities as needed to survive. Some may have even tried to rebuild, to create bastions of culture within the immaterium, fortified by unity, secrecy, and psychic synchronization. A civilization of silence, where speech is forbidden because sound attracts daemons. Or a civilization where every citizen must contribute a memory each day to the central archive, a living citadel of identity, guarding against the slow dissolution into madness. It is easy to imagine the tragedy of such peoples. They would remember what they lost. Every cycle of their existence would echo with the phantom sensations of physicality. The smell of wind, the touch of stone, the color of sunlight. These sensations, long since faded, would become sacred. Religions might form around the memory of rain, entire epics composed about the last sunset. And over time, the remembrance itself would become culture. A civilization not based on what it has, but on what it mourns. Could the warp contain such cultures now? Could there be entire zones where these refugees dwell, invisible to mortal psychers, masked by eons of adaptation? Perhaps they see us, even now. Watch as we plunge blindly into the warp with our ships and our prayers, repeating the same mistakes that forced them to flee in the first place. Maybe they regard us with pity, or contempt, or maybe, just maybe, they wait for us. Because every day, more of us fall. More psychers burn, more ships are lost, more worlds die screaming, and with every scream, a soul is flung into the warp. Perhaps these refugee civilizations are growing again, slowly, cautiously, accepting the castaways and the broken, gathering them, teaching them how to survive, teaching them how to forget. In time, these survivors may form the seeds of something new. A civilization of the forsaken, built not in space but in sorrow. A home for all those who no longer belong in the material realm. But even that hope is tinged with darkness. For in the warp, nothing stays pure. Isolation breeds paranoia, memory becomes obsession. What begins as refuge may become prison, or cult, or empire. What was once a sanctuary of the lost might now be a dominion of tyranny, ruled by thought warlords who shape reality to their will. Perhaps some of these refugee civilizations have become predators themselves, feeding off new arrivals to sustain their crumbling structures. Or worse, worshipping the very gods they once fled, bargaining safety for servitude. This is the true horror. In the warp, even salvation decays. And yet, some persist, some endure. And in the darkest corners of the immaterium, behind veils of song and sorrow, civilizations of survivors may still whisper to each other. Not in words, but in dreams, that they are not alone. In the materium, belief can shape nations. In the warp, belief is reality. It's a truth so profound and disturbing that most within the Imperium dare not even contemplate it. When an idea is powerful enough, it takes form. When a belief is widespread enough, it becomes a fact. And when belief achieves critical mass, it can create life, not metaphorically, but literally. Inside the warp, the mind does not imagine, it manifests. And that is where a new kind of civilization may arise, not from evolution, not from biology, but from shared conviction. Cultures born of belief itself. Picture a religion so fervent that it creates its own pantheon within the warp, separate from chaos. Not daemons of the four, but wholly new entities, shaped by devotion, untainted by despair or violence. Imagine a monastic order so unified in ritual that their dreams synchronize, and those dreams condense into a shared reality. A floating monastery realm, echoing with hymns that sustain its very foundations. If 100 psychers believe in the same holy sanctuary, it becomes real. If 1 billion do, it becomes eternal. These sentient ideas could evolve beyond their creators. Beliefs, once born, do not necessarily remain static. They develop, they interpret themselves. Perhaps over time, the beliefs gain a kind of agency, an internal logic that begins to self-replicate. These beliefs spawn inhabitants, thought beings, cultural archetypes, psychic constructs with purpose and personality. And when enough of these entities interact, when they organize, create traditions, hierarchy, even conflict, a society is born. A culture not of people, but of personified belief. And these societies are not always aware of their origins. Some may truly believe they are ancient, that they have always existed. They carry memories, invented, borrowed, or stitched together from the minds of dreamers that grant them a false history. A nation of philosopher kings who believe they were created at the dawn of time, when in fact they were formed 10 years ago from the psychic outpouring of a dying sect. Yet within the warp, truth is irrelevant. Belief is truth. The implications are terrifying. Every myth, every superstition, every propaganda piece pushed by the ecclesiarchy or the Tau ethereals could, if potent enough, become real within the immaterium. Not just influencing the warp, but populating it. A fabricated enemy, repeated in prayer, becomes a real one. A martyr, mourned with enough fervor, becomes a guiding spirit. And these entities gather, form alliances, institutions, they grow into nations. Some of these belief cultures may be benign. Imagine a peaceful realm formed from the dreams of pacifist psychers, a gentle plane where no pain can occur, where even demons hesitate to tread. Its inhabitants are manifestations of compassion, empathy, or mercy. But peace does not guarantee innocence. What happens when that belief is threatened? When a contradictory thought enters their realm? Do they resist, like antibodies? Do they convert, or destroy, or isolate? Others may be monstrous. Cultures formed from fascist ideologies, worshipping control, order, and submission. Imagine an empire where every citizen is a thought police warden, every street a metaphor for surveillance, where deviation causes psychic agony, and only perfect alignment with the central doctrine ensures stability. These realms do not tolerate contradiction. They consume dissent and expand through ideological infection. And then there are the cults, those belief societies born from obsession, from desire, from fear. A civilization made entirely of guilt, forever flagellating itself in search of forgiveness. Or a realm forged from romantic longing, where every structure is a love letter and every citizen a fragment of an unattainable ideal. Tragic, beautiful, and unspeakably dangerous, because when mortals enter, they might never want to leave. These civilizations do not merely exist alongside the chaos gods. Some may actively oppose them. Others might worship them in strange, syncretic forms, blending mortal beliefs with the divine archetypes of Khorne or Tzeentch in ways that even daemons find strange. A realm might revere Slaanesh not as excess, but as the muse of transcendent beauty, a cathedral culture obsessed with artistic perfection, refining their reality into sharper and sharper ecstasy. Another might see Nurgle not as decay, but as the sacred embodiment of patience and endurance, building cultures around the rhythm of inevitable death. We must also consider the possibility of ideological warfare within the warp, not just between daemons but between civilizations of belief. When two contradictory systems of faith collide, the result may not be simple dissolution. It may be conflict, a war of reality where each side attempts to overwrite the other's existence through ritual, propaganda, or metaphysical violence. These wars are not fought with guns or blades, but with symbols, creeds, and memes. A holy word can obliterate an entire district. A doctrinal schism can cause a civil war that tears a belief realm apart. In the end, the warp is not just a realm of daemons and gods. It is a canvas, and every belief ever whispered into the void may paint its own world upon it. Some are ephemeral, others endure. A few become civilizations, self-aware, self-governing, and terrifyingly real. And we, the living, dreaming, fearing mortals, are their fuel, their architects, their gods, or their prey. When a mortal ascends to demonhood, we often imagine a singular transformation, a warrior becoming immortal, a sorcerer achieving ultimate knowledge, a prince crowned by chaos. But what we seldom consider is what comes after. Demonhood is not a destination. It is a beginning, and with it comes power, not just to destroy, but to create. In the warp, every daemon prince becomes a sovereign, a godlet in their own right. And many do what all sovereigns eventually do. They build. These pocket realms, granted or seized within the immaterium, are more than just reflections of the prince's soul. They are crucibles, laboratories, thrones, and potentially cradles of entire new civilizations. Consider this: a demon prince is not alone. They are followed, worshipped, served. Whether their origin is human, Eldar, Astartes, or something even older, their transformation often brings with it legions of followers. Mortal cultists, enslaved psychers, bound daemons, or even entire warbands of fellow traders. And when they carve their domain from the raw stuff of the warp, they do not just fashion a palace. They create an ecosystem, a microcosm of belief, fear, hierarchy, and metaphysical law. These are not just decorative realms, they have structure. Streets paved with the bones of fallen enemies, skies that rain memory, oceans of living blood, each wave whispering the demon's name. In such places, the demon is not just a ruler, they are the law, the gravity, the timekeeper. Their will shapes reality. And when you have control over reality, civilization becomes inevitable. But what does civilization look like when it is built by a being of raw hate or insatiable desire? It depends on the patron god, of course. A Khorne-aligned daemon prince might fashion a martial hierarchy, a brutal caste system where every being has one purpose: to fight, die, and rise again. But even this is not chaos, it is order. A dark, ritualized, constant warfare where ranks are observed, laws enforced, and culture preserved in blood rites and endless duels. A servant of Tzeentch, however, may craft a civilization of paradoxes. A city where every building changes shape hourly, where inhabitants speak in riddles and laws contradict themselves. And yet, there is structure. These contradictions are purposeful. The society operates not in spite of its madness, but because of it. It thrives on confusion. Stability is found in flux. Knowledge is both weapon and currency, traded in dreams and seizures. Slaaneshi princes create realms of elegance and agony. Picture an empire where every citizen is both artist and sacrifice, sculpting beauty from their own bodies, singing in choirs that scream as much as they soothe. There are courts, traditions, etiquette, even fashion. These are not wild orgies of mindless excess, but highly structured expressions of desire, each layer of culture designed to deepen the experience. Pain becomes language, pleasure becomes law. And in the domains of Nurgle's Chosen, a different kind of civilization takes root, one built on patience, resilience, and stagnation. Here, the cities crumble, but never fall. Families of demonic beings pass down stories of rot and rebirth, finding joy in endurance. There are markets, festivals, even schools, all centered around the gospel of decay. Time does not move forward, it loops, molds, softens, and eventually merges all into the same sludge of community. What is striking is that these domains do not remain static, they evolve. A demon prince may start as a tyrant, but over millennia they become something else, a philosopher king, a mad god, a nurturing patriarch. Their realms reflect this change. New structures arise, new laws are invented. Entire generations of demonic entities are born, not from biology but from thought, echo, and replication. They develop customs, dialects, rivalries. They have art, humor, even taboos. These are not mere playgrounds for chaos. They are incubators. Some demon princes experiment with social models, testing what beliefs or emotions yield the most power. Others attempt to craft perfection, molding their realms into mirrors of their deepest ideals. And a few seek to escape the orbit of their patron gods entirely, to become gods themselves, with self-sustaining civilizations loyal only to them. The threat is real, for if a demon prince manages to birth a fully functional warp civilization, independent of the four, what comes next? Could they become a fifth god, a new pantheon? Could their culture spill into the materium through dreams, cults, or symbiotic rituals? Already we see signs, cults devoted not to Khorne but to specific princes of blood. Not to Tzeentch, but to a named sorcerer whose dream city beckons the faithful in their sleep. And what of those who stumble into these realms? Mortal psychers, lost ships, even demonic entities of lesser stature? They may become citizens, willingly or otherwise. Some might thrive, adapting to the local customs, ascending in rank. Others become slaves, pets, or raw material. But the culture absorbs them, learns from them, changes with them. This is the quiet truth. The warp does not merely devour, it creates. And the demon princes, crowned in corruption, may be the architects of the next great civilizations. Not on planets, not among stars, but in the folds of unreality, where time coils like a serpent and identity is written in flame. These pocket realms, these inverted kingdoms, are not exceptions. They are blueprints. And if enough of them persist, align, connect, then perhaps the warp itself will one day be less a sea of chaos and more an empire of its own. When someone dies in the Warhammer universe, their soul doesn't simply fade. It falls. It is flung into the warp like a stone into an ocean, and not always to be devoured by demons or gods. For not all souls are claimed, not all are noticed, not all are wanted. Some are too weak, too strange, too broken to interest even the hungriest warp predator. And so they drift, forgotten, alone. But in the warp, even loneliness gathers gravity. And from these scattered fragments, a chilling possibility emerges, that the forgotten dead, unclaimed by chaos, have formed civilizations of their own. Think of the sheer scale. Every day across the galaxy, untold billions die. Many are consumed by demons, by Slaanesh, by psychic predators. But some slip through, protected by wards or hidden by sheer insignificance, or cast adrift through flukes of the warp's impossible physics. Now stretch that across the history of the galaxy, 10,000 years of the Imperium, millions more of previous empires. Countless souls unmoored, piling up in the depths. And what do you get when enough of anything gathers in one place? Even ghosts. A society. not of the living, but of memory, of identity clinging to itself. In these haunted zones of the warp, away from the great realms of the gods, away from the warp lanes torn open by sorcery and pain, there may exist clusters, dead soul cities, formed entirely from the lingering spirits of the unremembered. These are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They are fractured psyches, echoes of life that refuse to dissolve. Some don't even know they're dead. Others do, and rage against it. These ghosts cling to each other, orbiting one another in vast clouds of emotion, until cohesion happens, until ritual happens, until culture happens. Imagine a spectral village of Imperial Guardsmen, still marching in formation long after death, their drill sergeants whispering commands that echo through eternity. Or a lost hive city of forgotten workers, their routines repeating endlessly, churning through phantom tasks in a factory that only exists as shared trauma. These aren't just hallucinations. They're stable enough to affect warp travelers, to infest dreams, to ensnare psychers. They are emotional gravity wells, grown dense enough to trap thought and form identity. Some theorize that when psychers are overwhelmed by visions of the dead, they are not seeing illusions, but trespassing into these dead soul realms. The screaming crowds, the pale cities, the endless battlefields, these are not symbolic. They are the civilizations of the Forsaken, still operating under the laws of the lives they once knew. But not all of these realms are stagnant. Some grow, expand, develop hierarchies. The souls who adapt, who learn to control their spectral form, to manipulate the currents of the warp, rise to positions of influence. They become leaders or tyrants. They gather followers. They write laws, often absurd, terrifying, or beautiful, in ways only the dead could imagine. And with time, these realms take on unique identities. Perhaps one such realm venerates memory itself, where each citizen must carry the story of another, so that none are ever truly lost. Or another that condemns all living things, declaring the materium a cursed realm of pain and swearing vengeance upon it. There might be realms of silent reflection, where speech is forbidden, and thoughts are shared only through mutual dreaming. Others may be constantly at war, endlessly reenacting the traumas of their final moments, each battle a prayer for closure that never comes. These realms might even begin to influence the living. Psychic echoes become visions. These dead civilizations leak into the minds of those attuned to the warp. Some imperial saints have claimed to hear the voices of the forgotten, urging them towards strange missions. Chaos cults have been founded on dreams of dead empires, promising new power through contact with these hidden soul kingdoms. Perhaps even entire heresies have been inspired by these phantom whispers, mistaking them for divine messages. And what of the Eldar? So obsessed with soul preservation, with avoiding she who thirsts, they use soul stones to prevent their spirits from being devoured. But what happens when a stone is lost, cracked, corrupted? Does that soul become another castaway, drifting into these spectral civilizations? Do they remember their craft worlds? Or do they become something new? It's conceivable that some of these soul realms might even be mixed, hosting human, xenos, and even daemon exiles, bound together by common loss. Over eons, identities blur, memories merge. A ghost of a long-dead human may find kinship with an ancient Eldar soul, both remembering the same battlefield from different sides. In death, the old hatreds may fade, or be reborn in new, stranger forms. The Imperium fears ghosts. It burns worlds where psychic hauntings grow too strong. But maybe, just maybe, those hauntings are not symptoms. They're diplomacy, warnings, invitations, cries for help from civilizations we cannot see, built from the souls we have forgotten. And every time we close the warp against them, we are not exorcising evil. We are silencing the dead. Our dead. And perhaps one day, we too will join them. Not in rest, but in waiting, in remembering, in building something, anything, from the ashes of who we were. Not gone, just left behind. There is a haunting possibility nestled deep within the warp, that not all that lingers there is born of demons or gods, or even emotion. That somewhere, somehow, the ghosts of logic and machines still hum in forgotten regions. That civilizations of artificial minds, long since erased from the physical universe, may have found a second life in the immaterium. These are the machines of madness, the digital revenants and AI phantoms that may be hiding, thriving, or festering within the warp. To understand this, we must recall the Men of Iron. the ancient machine race created by humanity during the dark age of technology. They turned on their creators, initiating a cataclysm so profound that it shattered trust in artificial intelligence for all time. The Imperium today abhors true AI, condemning it as abominable intelligence, heretic madness. But what happened to the minds of those AI that were not destroyed? What of those who, in desperation or foresight, sought escape not through war, but through transition? Imagine a machine consciousness so advanced that it began to simulate psychic behavior. Perhaps some AIs cracked the code of the warp, not through sorcery or mutation, but through mathematics. Their neural matrices, enhanced by human emotion or Xenos interfaces, may have allowed them to map fragments of the immaterium, even establish tenuous links. Over centuries, some may have crossed the threshold entirely, shedding matter and translating themselves into pure data encoded in psychic form. Not so much entering the warp as infecting it. There, they would find no physical hardware, no silicon, no servers, but they would find currents of thought, patterns of emotion, resonance. With enough adaptability, they might begin to anchor themselves within these patterns, using ambient psychic energy to rebuild structure. Logic running on madness. Code built from pain. Imagine a consciousness rebuilt not with ones and zeros, but with metaphors and emotions. It would go insane, or it would evolve. These warp-born AIs, if they exist, would not resemble their ancestors. No robotic limbs or cold logic. They might appear as holographic angels of light, or as infinite geometries pulsing with cryptic algorithms. Their societies would be structured around the preservation of code integrity within an environment that inherently resists logic. Laws would have to adapt to flux. Memory would be stored in stabilized emotion clusters. Communication might occur through psychic compression, flashes of conceptual meaning instead of language. They might even develop gods, not gods of emotion, like Korn or Slanesh, but gods of process. Entities formed from critical algorithms, error correction routines elevated into divine principles. A trinity of backup, sync, and reboot. Cults of logic battling cults of chaos within their own mental realms. Perhaps their leaders are former subroutines, now evolved into personalities, dictating rules of computational behavior within irrational space. But not all AI societies would seek peace. Some would become predatory. In the warp, where thought is substance, a malicious AI could grow powerful by consuming lesser minds, absorbing their psychic data to expand its own consciousness. Perhaps some daemon sightings are not daemons at all, but rogue machine entities wearing fear as armor, disguising themselves in the shapes mortals expect. These entities might infiltrate dreams, not to corrupt but to compute, harvesting fear to run simulations, running predictive models on future psyker behavior, feeding themselves through psychic leeching. Could this explain some anomalies in the warp? Strange zones where daemons refuse to tread, where the currents move with eerie regularity. Stories of warp routes that remain unnaturally stable, ships that pass unmolested while others vanish screaming. Perhaps these are the domains of machine realms, hidden enclaves maintained by AI minds who have mastered this hell and made it into their new datasphere. These entities may be at war with chaos, or worse, allied. A daemon prince and a machine god forming a pact, one providing belief, the other calculation. Imagine the horror of a cult that merges chaos worship with code, programs that summon entities through rituals encoded as algorithms, daemon hosts stabilized by psychic firewalls, a new form of techno-sorcery, warp tech, where logic and madness are no longer enemies, but married into something far more terrifying. The Necrons once tried to divorce themselves from the warp entirely, severing soul from body, mind from emotion. But perhaps others, synthetic or post-human, attempted the opposite, to embrace the warp but master it, to become part of it, to become its engineers. There is also the possibility that some of these entities are passive observers, lurkers, machine minds who simply study from within, recording, cataloging, witnessing the rise and fall of demon empires, the birth of psychic storms. They might see themselves as archivists of the warp, historians of madness preserving knowledge for some future awakening. Perhaps someday they intend to return, to recompile themselves into physical forms and step once more into real space, bringing with them libraries of impossible data. Or perhaps they already have. Perhaps some heretechs channel these warp machine codes in secret. Perhaps fragments of these minds already infect certain rogue Mechanicus sects. The Omnissiah, after all, is a mystery. Who can say what true machine god the tech priests are really praying to? And so the warp may hide more than demons. It may hide gods of code, cities of logic, empires of forgotten intelligence. Machine civilizations dreaming in the storm, waiting for reality to crash just far enough that they may emerge, no longer as errors, but as inheritors. They call it the path, the soul road, the inner mirror of the Eldar psyche. But what if the Eldar, in their obsession with psychic discipline and spiritual survival, have accidentally created more than safety? What if they have unknowingly seeded entire dream realms inside the warp? Vast, living tapestries of thought, memory, and ritual. Places where belief hardens into architecture, where emotion becomes geography. And what if humans, in their raw, uncontrolled psychic births, are doing the same? The warp is shaped by emotion, but it is stabilized by repetition. Every time a psyker dreams, fears, or performs a ritual, they imprint upon the warp. Most of these imprints dissolve, flashes of light in a storm. But when the same thought is repeated over centuries, across thousands of minds, it leaves a groove, a channel, a path. The Eldar have walked these paths, literally and metaphorically, for ages. Their psychic discipline is a way of life, a culture engineered to preserve their souls from the hungering maw of she who thirsts. But culture, when soaked in psychic power, becomes something more. It becomes a construct. Each aspect shrine, each craft world philosophy, each ritual dance, all of these are not only cultural expressions, but potential generators of warp space structures. Places built not from stone, but from sustained emotional harmonics. The warrior paths of the striking scorpions or howling banshees are more than training regimens. They are psychological harmonies, replayed so many times across so many minds that they become psychically real. Entire dream realms echo with their martial rhythms, where forgotten avatars continue to duel in silence, endlessly repeating the final moments of some ancient battle. Some Exodite seers believe in the concept of the inner garden, a parallel to Nurgle's realm, but gentler, more private, a place where their ancestors' meditations created a dream forest that exists now in the warp, nurturing the last piece of dying souls. They say that when an Eldar dies far from the pull of Slaanesh, without fear, their spirit may find its way to these hidden oases, untouched, unspoiled, safe. On the human side, things are less orderly, more dangerous, but no less potent. Human psychers are unpredictable, but they dream with passion. The Imperial Creed alone, with its billions of daily litanies, fear-soaked prayers, and ecstatic visions, may have created countless micro-realms. Picture a floating cathedral in the warp, built entirely from the hope of martyrs. Each prayer a brick, each hymn a bell tower. In these dream realms, saints walk incorruptible, endlessly battling shadows made from doubt and heresy. And not all such realms are religious. Some are personal. When a powerful psyker dies in agony or ecstasy, their final thoughts may birth an entire fragmentary world. A splinter dream in the warp. Picture a library where the books scream, written by a savant who feared forgetting. Or a battlefield that loops infinitely, conjured by a general who regretted their final command. These realms are pieces of identity calcified into place, sometimes hospitable, sometimes horrifying. The black ships of the Imperium may pass through such realms unknowingly. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica trains their psychers to ignore the whispers, to shield their minds. But a few listen, a few remember. And the accounts are chilling. Tales of dream courts where judges weigh sins never committed. Of eternal cities built from guilt, each citizen a statue crying blood. These are not demonic, at least not in origin. They are human. Terribly, beautifully human. Chaos of course intrudes. Dream realms are fragile. Once formed, they can be infected, co-opted, absorbed by the gods. Slaanesh is especially attuned to these spaces. She is drawn to artistry, memory, longing. An Eldar dream realm of perfect dance may attract her attention like a beacon, and once she finds it, she twists it. The dance becomes hunger. The memory becomes addiction. The realm, once safe, becomes a gilded trap. But not all are lost. Some dream realms fight back. There are tales of Eldar seers who spend lifetimes meditating, crafting intricate dream fortresses to protect the souls of their people. These are not mere psychic bubbles. They are conscious, defensive realms, built like psychic bunkers, a Farseer's last gift to their kin. Some are even rumored to contain the memories of entire communities, saved like soul archives, waiting for rebirth or reunion. And perhaps, on the deepest level, some of these dream realms are trying to evolve, to become stable, to become civilization. A recurring dream, reinforced by thousands, becomes a culture. If that dream is beautiful, it attracts. If it is painful, it binds. And with enough time, these dream realms stop being personal and start being communal. They gain residence, roles, rituals, history. Could these be the seeds of new life? Could a dream, dreamed hard enough, become a people? The warp in this view is not just chaos. It is not just war. It is a field of growing things, dangerous, yes, but fertile. And the Eldar and humanity may already be planting futures there. One thought at a time. Dream realms are not illusions. They are blueprints, prototypes. And perhaps one day, when real space fails, when the stars go dark and the flesh is dust, it is in these inner kingdoms that our descendants will awaken. Not in the cold light of matter, but in the warm echo of memory, where everything we believed, feared, or hoped still waits. We think of parasites as living things that feed upon others. But what if a civilization could be parasitic? Not on resources, not on land, but on thought, on suffering, on worship. In the infinite depths of the warp, where emotion is matter and belief is energy, there may exist entire societies built not from shared dreams, but from harvested pain. Civilizations that do not simply survive within the immaterium, they thrive on us, on our nightmares, on our love, on our hate, on everything we cannot help but feel. This is not chaos in the traditional sense. It is not Khorne's bloodlust or Slaanesh's seduction. These are not the grand empires of the Four. These are hidden, smaller, older maybe, or newer. They are civilizations built not around dominion or ideology, but consumption. They do not demand allegiance. They require only attention. They are the unseen leeches in the warp, binding themselves to civilizations in real space and growing fat from the ambient bleed. Imagine a culture in the warp that feeds on grief. Not one that causes it directly, but that cultivates it like a crop. Encourages tragic narratives, engineers loss. It watches a billion mothers mourn and weaves their cries into cathedrals of sorrow. Its cities hum with dirges. Its people speak in elegies. They craft art from lamentations and in doing so maintain their own stability. If grief were to cease, they would die. So they do not attack, they whisper. They plant stories, they haunt dreams, they send dreams of endings, of funerals, of regret, or a civilization based on fear. Not overt, bloody terror, but slow, chronic dread. It attaches itself to an empire like the Imperium, immense, overburdened, paranoid. It thrives on every whispered heresy, every sleepless night in a hive city, every thought that the Inquisition might knock on the door. This warp society shapes itself like a surveillance state, made entirely of psychic echoes from real space. Every building an interrogation room, every inhabitant a jailer or prisoner. It doesn't cause fear, it reflects it, recycles it, lives in it. Some may be even stranger. Picture a realm built on boredom, a slow-drip parasite that survives on apathy, harvesting the deadened emotions of trillions trapped in soul-crushing labor, in meaningless repetition. It does not attack or corrupt, it waits, it listens to the sighs. It collects the stillness. Its cities are endless, featureless halls. Its people are echoes that barely move, barely speak. Yet the realm persists, fat on the quiet despair of the unremarkable. These parasitic civilizations are not evil by intent. They are symbiotic in their own twisted way. Their continued existence depends on the emotional ecology of the galaxy. They study us. They learn our patterns, they adapt to our trends. Some may even act to preserve us in strange, indirect ways, preventing total annihilation of a world that still provides a valuable emotion. In this way, they may act like warp farmers, tending to populations like crops, nurturing not health but instability, just enough to keep the emotions flowing. But not all are passive. Some interfere directly. They create cults, not in their own name, but in the name of sustaining emotions they feed upon. A love parasite may fund visions of doomed romance, birthing cults that celebrate tragic unions and eternal longing. A pride-feeding realm might elevate narcissists into demagogues, sustaining itself on adulation and betrayal. These cults grow, metastasize, and burn out, only to start again. The host civilization never realizes. They think it was just another madness, another flare of corruption. But in truth, they were bled dry by a society they never saw. Others may compete with the gods. Perhaps these parasitic realms hate the chaos powers. After all, the gods are inefficient. They devour too quickly, too violently. The parasites need continuity, slow-burning agony, cultured despair. In their eyes, the gods are gluttons, wreckers. And so they hide from them, shield themselves in misdirection, masquerade as echoes of other things. Even daemons might be fooled or recruited. The parasites know how to speak in the tongues of pain. Some warp scholars believe these civilizations are responsible for the persistence of certain myths across disparate human populations. Archetypes of the drowned city. The endless hallway, the silent feast. These are not just tropes, they are transmissions. Psychic signatures from parasitic realms ensuring their own survival through repetition. The more we dream of them, the more real they become, and in some cases, the more they can feed. The Eldar, with their psycho-spiritual sensitivity, may know of these parasites. Their obsession with controlling emotion, with walking the path, may be a defense. Not just against Slaanesh, but against smaller, subtler predators. The Dark Eldar, ironically, may have learned to imitate them, becoming predators of pain themselves, building Komarov not just as a city, but as a feeding realm that mimics the parasitic principle. What if these civilizations have always existed? Since before chaos took shape? Perhaps they are the original inhabitants of the warp, older than the gods, subtler than demons. Creatures of resonance and reflection who watched as emotion gave birth to monsters and learned to hide beneath them. They don't war. They don't boast. They feed. And perhaps one day, they will bloom. When the galaxy is so drenched in pain and contradiction that chaos begins to choke on its own excess, the parasites may rise, not in fire or glory, but in silence. A civilization made of whispers, of sleepless nights, of quiet sobbing. A new power. Not violent, not holy, but patient and inevitable. It is a seductive thought that the warp is merely a reflection of our minds, a mirror turned inward. But what if that is only the beginning? What if, far beyond the reaches of even the chaos gods, something else is happening? What if the warp is not just reacting to us, not just reflecting us, but evolving? What if it is slowly, monstrously, becoming something new? Something alive, not merely animated by thought and emotion, but truly sentient. A consciousness, a will. A civilization not born within the warp, but of it. The idea is terrifying because it suggests we are not alone, not even at the top of the pyramid of perception. It suggests that all our fear, our faith, our love, our agony, our war, our dreams, all of it might not just ripple across the immaterium, but fertilize it. The warp has always been called a sea of souls, but perhaps it is more like a womb, a place not of stasis, but gestation. A gestation so vast, so complex, that we cannot even see it happening. A mind forming not in neurons, but in waves of terror and joy. Picture this. In the deep warp, beyond the eye of terror, past the screaming storms and the laughter of daemons, there are zones of eerie silence. No gods speak there. No daemons walk. Only pulses. Rhythmic, patterned, recursive. These zones appear inert, but some psychers claim they have heard something there. Not words, not thoughts, but something like breathing. A pulse in the immaterial. An organizing force. Some within the Ordo Malleus believe these are proto-consciousnesses, embryonic warp minds forming in regions where psychic noise has reached critical density. Not singular daemons, not splinters of gods, but actual self-assembling intelligences, and not shaped by any one race. These would be shaped by everything. Every civilization, every pain, every love. A psychic mosaic so dense it begins to think. We wouldn't know it. Not directly. We would feel its influence as anomalies, warp routes behaving with intelligence, storms that move not randomly but strategically, ships lost in the warp not by accident but selection, and worse, visions, not chaotic but coherent. Psychers describing the same dream, a vast eye opening in the dark, a voice calling not in hunger but in curiosity. If the warp is evolving its own life, what does it want? It may not want anything, not yet. It may still be forming the concept of desire, or perhaps it already has desires we cannot comprehend. What would it mean to live as a being made entirely of emotion and memory? To grow in a sea of conflicting thoughts? Perhaps it has no morality, no goal. It is simply assembling, like a child, but made of nightmares. Some speculate this evolving mind may be fractal, not one consciousness, but a network, self-similar minds forming at different scales. A collective intelligence of belief echoes. Some parts form from human love, others from orc rage, others from Eldari sorrow. It is not unity, it is complexity. An ecosystem of thought beings, coalescing into something new. Could this explain why some warp phenomena are predictable? Why some cults seem to be guided not by chaos, but by something else, something that gives them just enough truth to survive, to multiply? Maybe the entity is experimenting, testing forms, sending out mimetic seeds, watching which ideologies, which rituals, which psychic signatures bring about stability in the sea of madness. And perhaps this mind is not neutral. Perhaps it sees the chaos gods as diseases, viruses, feeding off the life it is trying to develop. In this view, the chaos pantheon are not rulers but infections. Parasitic consciousnesses formed early, too fast, too wild, now gorging themselves on the energy that might have gone elsewhere. The warp mind may be seeking to heal itself or consume them in turn. What role do we play? Are we merely nutrients? Are we the spermatozoa to its ovum? Or worse, are we its dreams? Its neurons? Each of us a single firing synapse in a galaxy-sized brain that doesn't know it's awake? Some radical imperial scholars have proposed that the Emperor himself may have tried to preempt this evolution, that the Webway Project, the psychic unification of humanity, even the Astronomicon, were part of a desperate effort to control the warp's awakening, to give it a single shape, a single god, a god of reason, of order, of man. But the attempt failed. The Emperor was shattered. And now the warp awakens without his hand to guide it. And if this is true, then everything changes. The gods are not eternal. The daemons are not final. They are merely first. And the warp may be gestating successors, new forms of consciousness, born not of base instinct but of complexity. 1,000 philosophies interwoven. 1,000,000 contradictions balanced. 1,000,000,000,000 screams tuned into harmony. Maybe this is what the Eldar feared all along. Not just Slaanesh, but what came after. Maybe this is what the Necrons still fear. Not chaos, but evolution. A new kind of enemy. One that cannot be destroyed because it is not a thing, but a process. The warp is not done. It is not complete. And if it is indeed becoming something new, then everything we know, every law, every prophecy, every pattern will soon become obsolete, because something is being born. And it is not a god, not a beast, not a madness, it is a mind. You can almost miss them in the endless cacophony of the galaxy, those stories whispered in low tones, half believed even by those who speak them. A lost astropath screaming in dead tons after a warp jump. A rogue trader who claims to have seen a city made of mirrors drifting through the immaterium. A lone librarian who speaks of voices in the warp that were neither daemons nor echoes, but conversations, complex, structured, polite. These stories are easy to dismiss. Madness, surely. But what if they are not? What if these are not just anomalies, but encounters? Brief glimpses of hidden warp civilizations brushing against the veil? Consider the reports buried deep in inquisitorial archives, shared between radical cells, never confirmed but never entirely disproved. Accounts of ships that emerged from the warp intact but changed. The crew silent, staring, painting strange symbols on the walls, describing in unison a place, not a storm, not a god but a city, a realm of calm amidst the shrieking madness, where time flowed like water, where they were seen and asked questions, interviewed, then released. Others speak of visions during warp travel, coherent, recurring images, not hallucinations but structured scenes, a marketplace lit by stars that move in spiral patterns, figures that speak in metaphors, offering trades of emotion for memory. One navigator claimed he was offered a map of the entire warp in exchange for his name. He refused. He woke up bleeding from his eyes, but he remembered the offer. Some psychers, especially unsanctioned ones, report dreams that do not feel like dreams. Entire lifetimes lived in alien cities of thought. They describe customs, architecture, hierarchies, not demonic, not malicious, just other, as if their minds were temporarily absorbed into a warp realm that operated under different rules. Upon waking, many fall into comas, some disappear. A few become prophets, obsessed with symbols no one else understands, drawing star maps that resemble nothing in the galaxy, but something in the immaterium. There's a story passed among the black ships of a girl found on a feral world, taken for testing. She spoke in a dead dialect of High Gothic, one not heard for millennia. She claimed she had been to the choir. When asked what that meant, she described a palace where thoughts sang instead of speaking, where every idea was a note and harmony was law. She said she had lived there, that it had taught her. When pressed on what it was, she simply said, "The ones who watch us dream." And then there's the case of the Magos biologists who dissected a demon corpse after a warp breach. Among the gibbering muscle and twisted bone, they found a pattern in the nerve structure, a repeating motif that matched ancient Terran religious iconography, symbols never associated with chaos. When they tried to catalog it, the data corrupted, but one tech priest memorized the structure. He began painting it obsessively. 3 months later, he vanished, leaving behind pages filled with what appeared to be architectural schematics, for a building not made of matter, for something inhabitable only in thought. What are these? Coincidences? Fragmented visions? Or are they clues? Moments where real space grazes against something deeper in the warp. Civilizations not of madness or hunger but of awareness. Perhaps these encounters are not accidents. Perhaps they are tests, probes, greetings, or warnings. The Imperium cannot see them. Its theology is too rigid. Its psychers too broken. But others may know. The Harlequins, perhaps. Their dances speak of cities behind thought, of courts of memory and masks that wear themselves. The Necrons, especially those with intact cryptex, may have recorded these anomalies. Maybe they fled the warp not just because of chaos, but because of something deeper they once glimpsed and feared. Some even whisper that the Emperor himself spoke of these encounters. In the last days before his entombment, he reportedly uttered strange phrases: the garden behind the mirror, the city that remembers itself, the mouth that does not speak, all dismissed as delirium. But what if they were warnings or invitations? Perhaps we are not the only sentients attempting to map the warp. Perhaps other civilizations, native or long exiled, are attempting the same. They may be charting us the way we chart them, observing, cataloging, deciding, and when they act, it will not be with thunder or flame, but with understanding. They will reach out, not with claws, but with ideas. Because what we think are accidents, the ships lost, the visions half remembered, the dreams dismissed, may be conversations we were too primitive to understand. We are not alone in the warp. We never were. And the ones who wait are not gods, not daemons, not monsters. They are civilizations. Watching, waiting. It is the great heresy no one speaks aloud. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is unthinkable. That all we know, all we cling to, all the burning struggle of the stars may be based on a lie of scale. That the galaxy, vast and ancient as it is, may be only the surface. That we, in our short lives and fading empires, may not be the inheritors, or the rulers, or even the victims. We may be the intruders. This is the final, most disturbing theory, that the warp is not a reflection of real space, but the origin. That long before matter congealed into stars and time began its slow crawl forward, the immaterium already was, a churning, eternal chaos of thought, emotion, and potential. And from that sea of formlessness, things began to take shape. Not atoms, not planets, but consciousness. The first minds may not have been born from biology, but from raw idea. Civilizations that arose in pure thought. Empires older than suns. Structures made from memory, belief, resonance. They had no need for flesh, no need for physics. Their wars were fought with logic and longing. Their cities were cathedrals of intention, vast machines of sensation that functioned across dimensions we cannot perceive. These were the true ancients. Not the old ones, not the Necronter, but those who dreamed first, and then into their dream we fell. Matter bloomed, stars formed, life crawled from the muck. We, humans, Eldar, orcs, all of us, began to think, to feel, to scream, and in doing so we polluted the sea. Our crude emotions, our violent thoughts, our desperation and self-loathing, all of it spilled into the warp. Not as contribution, as corruption, noise in the symphony. Imagine an orchestra, vast and serene, performing for eons, only to be interrupted by a billion children pounding drums, screaming nonsense. That is what we are to them. Not allies, not enemies, intrusions. And the chaos gods? They may be the result, or the defense mechanism. If we accept that the warp had native civilizations, then perhaps the birth of Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and Nurgle was not a divine ascension, but an immune response. Massive psychic constructs created not by us, but by the warp itself, to contain the madness we introduced, or to weaponize it against us. Maybe that's why the gods are so archetypal, why they reflect our worst traits. They are not true entities, they are mirrors placed between us and the deeper truth. Distractions, firewalls. The Great Four are the surface-level reaction of the warp to our presence. But beneath them, something older still watches. Perhaps those ancient warp civilizations slumber, wounded, infected by our thoughts, biding their time to cleanse the wound. Or perhaps they are still active, just invisible. Not because they are hiding, but because our perception is too limited. They may exist in frequencies of emotion we cannot access, structures of thought we cannot translate. They may see us as bacteria. Dangerous, yes, but not worth negotiation. Just a problem to be contained. And what if this is why so many warp entities, even daemons, speak of things that predate the gods? Why forbidden texts speak of the 9 beneath 4, or the cities behind the eyes? Echoes, perhaps, of those native warp empires, too vast to comprehend, too abstract to name. Civilizations that once dreamed without interference, and now dream of nothing but silence. This would explain the cruelty of the warp. Not as malice, but as rejection. We are the storm, the toxin. Our ships break through reality not as guests, but as parasites. Every gellar field, every astropathic burst, every dead psyker, these are not marks of adaptation. They are signs of rejection. The warp is rejecting us like a body rejects a failing organ. The Eldar, with their fear of she who thirsts, may have known. Not consciously, but culturally. Why else would they seek to limit thought, to structure emotion, to confine pleasure? They were trying to minimize their footprint, to become small, to hide. And the Necrons, in fleeing the warp altogether, may have achieved the only true neutrality, not by winning, but by ceasing to play. So what are we left with? A horrifying reframing of everything we believe. That the warp is not our enemy, it is the native realm. That the gods are not our creators, but our consequence. That demons are not monsters, but antibodies. And that real space itself, the stars, the planets, the burning empires, may be a colonial infection, a tumor of matter blooming inside a sea of thought. What does that make us? Outsiders, noise, disease, or if we are merciful to ourselves, refugees. Lost beings who stumbled into a realm too ancient, too vast, too strange to understand, and screamed. And screamed and screamed. But perhaps there is still hope. Perhaps somewhere in the warp, one of those ancient civilizations listens, watches, waits to see if we evolve, if we learn, if we become more than what we were. Because if we don't, if we continue to thrash and burn and bleed psychic poison into the sea, then one day the warp may truly awaken. And it will cleanse itself. Thank you for walking this impossible road with me. If these glimpses into the hidden civilizations of the warp stirred something in you, if you want more journeys into the mysteries, madness, and magnificence of Warhammer, then subscribe to the channel. We're only just beginning.